Welcome into the Draft Dynasty Podcast. My name is Jeremy Betts, and I am here with a special guest here on this special episode of the DDP on the Fans First Sports Network. As you guys know, this show is all draft all the time, and right now we are in fantasy football season, draft season for those leagues, whether it's Dynasty, whether it's redraft. We've got all the different types of fantasy football happening at the same time here, and drafts are upon us. And to hash it out, I've got a fellow Betts on the podcast, Matthew Betts from the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. Betts, how you doing?
This is great, man. How you doing, Jeremy?
Yeah.
Happy to be here and appreciate you having me on. We were joking a little bit before we started recording. I was like, man, obviously my family, but I've met like 5, 6, 7 people in my life that have the same last name as me. So when you asked me to come on, I was like, I feel like I have to do this. Right, just to make sure that the Bettses get to hang out. So this is great. I'm glad to be here, man. And like I said, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, man, it's like a double or nothing bets right now. You know, it's
That's
just
right.
All the jokes can happen now. And I'm appear on another show, and we call it the All Bets Are Off segment. And I was like, I'm sure you have plays on your name all the time. I was listening to a couple of your shows, and they're calling you Betts. And I don't know if there's any relation. I guess you're an Eagles fan, right? Are you from Pennsylvania?
I am, yeah. Born and raised in PA. Grew up just outside of Hershey. So like where I live, it's basically like my neighbor across the street is a Pittsburgh fan. So it's pretty much split right down the middle. You're either Eagles or you're Steelers. There are like a couple of Giants fans just because Jersey's not super far away, but like right in the middle of PA, it's pretty much a 50-50 split.
Yeah, and my dad's from Pittsburgh, born and raised. So the Pennsylvania ties are strong. We might need to do some DNA testing after this to see if there's a relation. No, I'm just kidding. But I appreciate you coming on the show. We're going to talk some fantasy. And first, I just kind of wanted to dive into like some of the more difficult things to answer when it comes to fantasy football strategy. And it changes year to year, obviously, with how you're going to draft guys based on who's available and like if a position's top heavy or if there's more depth to it. And the two positions that really trick people out a lot, what do I do with this are quarterback and tight end. Especially in I play mostly PPR leagues, but most of what I do is not super flex. I have a couple of super flex leagues that I'm in, which obviously raises your quarterback value. But for single QB leagues, standard formats for rosters, that can get a little interesting. And then the tight ends are always their own conversation because after you get past the top 4 or 5 guys, if that, things really drop off, it seems like. So I just kind of wanted to open it up to you. How do you typically address quarterback and tight end? And does that change this year at all for you based on the talent available?
Yeah, I think, like you said, every year is a little bit different where you have to adjust based off the landscape. And, depending on where you're drafting, sometimes ADPs can be wildly different. Like, for example, I'm looking at ESPN right now. Baker Mayfield's going in the 7th round. On Yahoo, he's in the 5th round. So it's a different conversation. So you just need to make sure you're adjusting to the platform you're on. But like in general, we kind of know who the top dudes are, right? It's the same guys every year. It's Josh Allen, it's Lamar, Jalen Hurts, Jane Daniels has entered that conversation. A lot of people are propping up Joe Burrow into that kind of top 5, top 4 range, which to me feels like a bit of a trap for that pocket passer situation. So I see it as kind of a clear top 4 if you want one of the elites. Allen, Lamar, Daniels, Hurts. Not going to argue with anybody there, obviously. The tough part on those guys is just that, historically in home league type settings, like your usual 10, 12-man league, they will go super early. So right now, Josh Allen is like a consensus 2nd round pick. That's a tough sell, even though I love Josh Allen. Lamar will go at the back of the 2nd, early 3rd. And then kind of same thing with Jane Daniels. He's the new hot name. He's early 3rd. So you're paying a premium for those guys. And it's not that they don't deserve it. It's just a rich price to pay. So in home league settings, I'm usually not taking those types of guys just because of the cost associated with the 2nd or 3rd round quarterback. But I love them for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And I found myself, though, kind of like early targets as far as how I'm approaching it in home league settings is if I'm not going to get one of those 3 or 4 because I don't want to pay the tax. I think Joe Burrow is probably a little overpriced based off of potential regression, like just how pure that pass game ran last year with these wild shootouts and all those sort of things. A couple overtime games against the Ravens, like it just went bonkers. I've kind of said, okay, if I can't get that type of ceiling, I don't want to pay the price for that ceiling. How could I potentially manufacture it later in the draft? And you look at guys that are going a little bit later, like Justin Fields, he has major
Yeah.
issues, obviously, as a passer.
Yeah.
There's not
Yeah.
Garrett Wilson, but the dude has averaged over 55 rushing yards per game in his starts in his career. It's like, man, if he's going to do anything close to that, it's going to be hard for him not to be a top 8, 9 type of guy. So you're not getting the same ceiling, obviously, but that's a guy that I think you could arbitrage it a little bit with. I'm also super into Drake May this year, who, was second in the NFL last year in scramble yards behind only Jaden Daniels. You get Diggs now, you get Kyle Williams in the NFL draft, a new coaching staff that it's hard to put into words, like how bad the coaching situation was with Rob Mayo
Yeah.
last year in New England. Like, just get an adult in the room, get Josh McDaniels, who we all remember as a head coach was a train wreck, but like when he's been an OC, has been very good for his guys. You get an offensive line upgrade. Like Travion Williams is the best pass protection back in the class. Like all the signs are like, let's support Drake May and actually give him a chance. So he's currently in home leagues going in like the 11th, 10th, 13th round. Like if I miss out on one of the elites, those are kind of the two rushing upside guys that I've targeted as potential late round options.
Yeah, and when you're looking at upside, obviously rushing plays into that, and then the pocket passers, like you mentioned, Joe Burrow. I even kind of sit back and, Patrick Mahomes is the 6th quarterback in fantasy, according to Fantasy Pros, like 6th ranked here, and I think he's going in. Is it 4th and 5th round range right now, in a lot of leagues, based on what I'm seeing, and I just don't know if I'm willing to pay that price for those pocket passers, kind of like you're saying. So when I start to look down the tiers list, you mentioned Drake May. I think, Trevor Lawrence looks like a very interesting guy this year. And I know he's not going to give you like a lot of rushing upside, but as a scrambler, he's going to get out 2 to 3 times a game. And that could be interesting for you. And maybe in this Liam Cohen offense, he gets a little bit more opportunities to open things up and do a few more of the things that we thought maybe he could do as the highly touted first overall pick that he was. It just hasn't worked out for fantasy for him, but he's a guy I'm looking at in that range too. Let me ask you about like Jordan Love. Are we looking at a bounce back for Jordan Love this year? And he's not really a rushing quarterback either, but he'll get out and move a little bit as well. So I don't know. Trevor Lawrence, Jordan Love, Caleb Williams even kind of fall into that same category of guys that I'm like, I really want to buy into them from their passing upside, but do they give me anything else to make me think that they're going to be worth my time in the mid rounds of a draft?
Yeah, it's funny as you're talking there and just naming all those guys, like you can paint a pretty easy positive case for these guys, right? Like the quarterback as a whole position, I think is insanely strong when you can get those guys for some people in standard 1 quarterback leagues. A couple of the guys you mentioned are not going to be drafted. Like that's how strong the quarterback class or the quarterback group is this year. I'm seeing like a guy like Jordan Love, his ADP is like all over the place. On Sleeper, he's in the 9th round. On ESPN, he's in the 13th round. It's like, man, that's an awesome price tag to pay for Jordan Love, who the Packers are 12th and projected based off implied Vegas odds, their team total across the season. They're 12th in the league in that. And it's like, if you're quarterbacking that team, sure, Josh Jacobs is going to get his, but it almost kind of feels like that ADP like can't be right, if that makes sense, based off the projected offense. We love Matt LaFleur. They get a 1st round wide receiver finally with Matthew Golden. I think Josh Jacobs last year, where if you recall the end of season run, I think he scored in 8 straight games down the stretch. Like he was just insane. And obviously we think he'll get the goal line touches, but let's say Josh Jacobs has 4 or 5 less rushing scores, but the offense is still very good. I think Jordan Love is going to be the direct beneficiary there of a few more passing touchdowns. So yeah, Love's another guy that makes a ton of sense. I'm also super high on JJ McCarthy and just what he can do in this system with Kevin O'Connell, with Justin Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, all the weapons are there. So there's tons of guys. Brock Purdy, pretty easy bounce back type of guy this year, with the Niners having the easiest schedule in the NFL. I'm on him to win MVP, so this I hope that one comes to fruition. On the Caleb stuff, man, I get it. I really do. But we also have to acknowledge, like, last year, everybody, and myself included, were like, this is probably going to work, right? Like, he's insanely talented. It's a great situation for a rookie to be dropped in, and it was completely dysfunctional. I definitely think Ben Johnson is going to be clearly better for the situation in general, but the market is treating it as if this is definitely going to work. And
Sure.
I think it probably will, but I'm not as confident as the market because straight up Caleb was bad last year.
Yeah.
Looking at adjusted completion percentage from a clean pocket. So even if you say like the offensive line was bad, the sacks were an issue, which they were, even from a clean pocket, he was 26 to 30 quarterbacks in adjusted completion percentage among those who qualified. So he has got to play better. Romadunze has to take a step forward. A lot of stuff has to go right. Luther Burden, people are kind of mixed on in the dynasty community. Loveland dealing with an injury. Like, I just think there's a world that exists where like this team is fine and therefore all of their pieces don't hit at ADP. Just for context, their win total is 8.5. So it's not like Vegas is expecting them to be a Super Bowl contender. People got a little over their skis last year, and I'm just a little bit kind of tepid on making sure that those guys all hit is kind of how I would say it.
Yeah, and currently, like ADP, I'm just looking at the consensus from Fantasy Pros, but he's going ahead of Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy. He's going ahead of Fields, Stroud, and Love. Yeah, I mean, so the value probably doesn't hit right there. But if he ends up lasting a little bit longer, I guess I'd be more interested in him from that point of view. I look at a guy too, before we get over to the tight ends, Bryce Young, who finished on just such a tear last year. You upgrade his weapons, year 2 in a Dave Canales system. I think it, you start to see maybe some things come together for him, but is he somebody you're comfortable waiting on and drafting? I mean, he's going in the Michael Penix, Matthew Stafford range, according to ADPs on Fantasy Pros. So are you playing to his upside based on the end of last season, or is this a guy you're still kind of waiting on to see if he can get there?
Yeah, I think he's probably more of like a 2 quarterback league type of pick.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't think you probably have to go there in 1 QB leagues because we talked about all these guys, Love and McCarthy and Lawrence.
Sure.
Like, they're all free basically. And I would prefer those guys over Young. That said, in a 2 QB league, I think Bryce Young is super interesting. Or if you're playing the streaming game, week to week based off matchups,
right?
I think Young is really intriguing. His percentage of his fantasy points last year that came via his legs was 29%. For context, Lamar Jackson was at 26%, Josh Allen was 33%, Jaden Daniels was 35%. So I'm not saying he's running the same amount as those guys, but just like when you think about him, you think small pocket passer, but he ran way more than we remember down the stretch last year. And I'm not sure if that's going to be sticky or not, but at least is in the range of outcomes for him. And so, yeah, I think a guy that, like, right now we kind of have him based off the ADP I'm looking at. He's like quarterback 24, 25, depending on the site. Could he be the quarterback 14 or 15 and be a really nice kind of ADP win for you in 2 QB leagues? I think so. I still struggle to see like a huge ceiling. Like, I don't know. What's the optimal best case scenario for Bryce Young? Probably quarterback 12. Like, if everything goes right. So I just don't think you have to go there in 1 QB leagues, but in 2 QB leagues for sure. I'm a big fan of Ted McMillan. I think Dave Canales is a good coach, good schemer, all those things. Like, Thielen is still doing his thing as the safety blanket. Leggett and Coker are a nice kind of down the field targets. So there's definitely weapons there for Bryce Young to be, like I said, somewhere in that quarterback 13, 14, 15 range if things click.
And one thing we can be pretty confident in is that Canales offense supports a good running game usually. And even without some of the high-end dynamic names at running back and maybe an offensive line that could still use some growth and development and maybe a couple pieces over the next few years, efficiency wise, they were pretty good last year. And so Bryce Young's not going to have to do it all by himself. Maybe that opens things up for him as it did towards the end of last year. But let's kind of move on to the tight ends here. And this might be a different animal altogether. You've got, like, I don't know how you feel about it, but I've got like 3 guys that I feel good about. Great. 4 maybe if you want to put Sam Laporta in there. And so is it worth it to chase the Brock Bowers and Trey McBrides in rounds 2 and 3, or are you waiting at this position too?
Yeah, like, the quarterback is insanely strong. Tight end is anything but. And you mentioned it's Brock Bowers and Trey McBride's world, and then Kittle's kind of in his own tier right now based off ADP landscape and rankings. And then I guess you would bucket like Laporta and Hawkinson together, and then maybe like Kelsey Andrews, and then from there it's they get very close very quickly in tiers.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I think this is one where, like at quarterback, I said I'm not sure I'm really willing to pay that elite price tag. I want one of these top three guys. Year over year, like we kind of talk ourselves into these tight ends, and we're like, the elites have never been cheaper, and we did that last year with guys like Dalton Kincaid, which obviously in hindsight was a train wreck. We did it again for like the fourth straight year with Kyle Pitts. Like in best ball leagues last year, he was going in like the 6th, 7th round. I really think it's kind of those three at the top as very clear plug and play options. You never have to worry about it, guys, this year. And the nice thing about those guys is like there's not a lot of scary things in their profile that make you think that they can't do it. Like Brock Bowers did what he did as a rookie with Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew, and now you get a legit head coach in the room. You get a quarterback upgrade. I think the scheme is going to fit him well. So clearly he's in his prime. Like no concerns there. Trey McBride, probably the most obvious positive regression candidate for touchdowns in the entire NFL, right? Like they were force feeding him targets in week 16 just to try to get him a touchdown. So if Kyler just finds him 5, 6, 7 times, I think he can beat Brock Bowers as the tight end one. George Kittle, he's a guy that's just always been kind of boom bust. Last year, he was actually so consistent with his production. And I think that's going to continue this year. Obviously, you get Christian McCaffrey back, but when you look at the wide receiver room, Debo is gone. Brandon Ayuk is recovering from a multi-ligament ACL injury. Ricky Pearsall, I don't really know how good he is. Like we saw 2 games of him being great, and we saw, obviously he got shot in August, so context is needed, but we saw several games of him disappearing. And Juwan Jennings for like 3 or 4 years was a backup. So is this the truth of who he is, or is this just kind of a flash in the pan? I think you have all those question marks, and it just comes back to George Kittle as kind of the most obvious answer. So yeah, I want one of those 3 in home league type settings where you can draft them, put them in your lineup, and you never have to think about it again. That's how I'm approaching tight end this year. And just for context on their price, like Bowers kind of in the middle of the 2nd, McBride will sneak to kind of the early 3rd usually, and then Kittle in the 4th, I think is like a totally fine, like air quotes, consolation prize.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with you. If one of those guys is available to me in that range, I'm jumping on it because the tier drop is so dramatic. And like Sam Laporta, I don't know how you feel about him, but I think the Lions offense overall is due for some regression because Ben Johnson was just so efficient there. And as much as I like Dan Campbell and I believe in him and his ability to put together a team that is going to be competitive, probably at the highest level eventually, maybe year one, under a new guy calling plays and stuff, maybe it just doesn't quite kick in right away. And so as much as Laporta was featured at times in this offense, alongside Amon-Ra St. Brown as the pass catching group, I just don't know if it's going to be there yet, but consolation prize, I guess he'd be okay, right? In the 6th round, I think is where he's going about right now. And then after that, I'm just kind of waiting, I guess. My next, like I have some guys down the list that we'll get to in the second half of the show that, like I might just be drafting them because I feel like that they're going to have a good year and I can't really put any context behind it. But for all intents and purposes, it's those top guys or bust really at tight end. And then you're hoping that the rest of your team is good enough to hide the fact that you're not going to score much more than 8 or 9 points a week at tight end.
Yeah. You're pretty much playing matchups at that point, and maybe just kind of 1 or 2, like kind of pick 2 and then kind of pick matchups. It's tough, man. Yeah, it dries up really quick.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like the guys that you think you can count on for sure as like, I'll plug this guy in, I won't have to worry about it. They still have issues, right? Like Travis Kelce is now 35 years old. Entering last year, the whole conversation was they're probably going to, bring his snaps and routes down a little bit just to get him ready for the playoffs. And then Rashee Rice got hurt and they had to play him his normal amount. His yards per catch, his yards, after the catch are all declining year over year over year. It's like at some point, he's probably not going to pay it off. Mark Andrews, we talked about McBride being a huge touchdown regression candidate in a good way. Andrews is coming down in a huge way based off of him last year. His routes per game have dropped in 3 straight years. I think Isaiah Likely is probably the tight end of the future there in Baltimore. So Do they dial back his playing time this year? Mark Andrews, Jonnu Smith.
Yeah.
It's like, man, this guy's coming off a career year at age 30. I don't know how real that is. So, and then, Evan Ingram, David Njoku. It's like all these guys you don't feel like super comfy with them in your lineup.
Right.
So it kind of feels like you said, like that top 3 or 4 group. And then like you said, I'm waiting. And from there, just kind of mixing and matching archetypes of like, maybe you throw a dart on Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland and kind of hope that they are just that good because we don't know as rookies, and get like a stable veteran who's kind of boring, but like will give you points. Someone like, I don't know, Jake Ferguson, or it sounds gross to say, but like Zach Ertz, like those kind of guys. It's it's sketchy down there, man, for sure.
It is. Let me ask you this as a dynasty guy. Do you have a preference on the top 2 rookie tight ends who you're drafting in dynasty?
As a Penn State fan and Pennsylvania guy, I feel terrible saying this, but I actually prefer Colston Loveland. And it's not that I don't like Tyler Warren. I think he's awesome. But when you look at Loveland, he had the highest targets route run of any tight end prospect we've seen in the last decade. And his raw stats are not good from this past year because the quarterback play at Michigan was a train wreck. But when you look at his youth, the way he could potentially move as like this kind of move tight end, I see a higher ceiling for fantasy with that type of player than I did with Warren, who, don't get me wrong, I think Warren's going to be a very good pro. Profiles is more of like a solid, good starting tight end versus Loveland. I see a much higher ceiling. So that's where I'm at kind of with those two. I think that's, like I said, that feels sacrilegious to say just because of being a Pennsylvania guy. But I prefer Loveland slightly to Tyler Warren, though I think both are great prospects.
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm reversed just a little bit, but maybe that's just situation right now. And maybe down the line I would be wrong, but yeah, it's very close. I think, like you said, you really can't go wrong either way. If you're trying to get a tight end and you land one of those guys in your dynasty drafts, then you're probably getting a guy that's going to be, I don't know, top 6 or 7 tight end for dynasty down the road. Just based on their talent and the lack of talent in the league around them.
Yeah.
The one guy I wanted to mention that you mentioned his name, Evan Ingram. I think if there's anybody in that next level, I guess, that could push maybe the top 3 guys or get into that top 5 conversation, I think it might be Evan Ingram because of Sean Payton and they're gonna throw the ball a lot down there in Denver, and Bo Nix is going to be a little bit better this year probably as well. And so I think I like Evan Ingram as who's in that next group that could maybe push into the top 4 or 5. That's my guy. But I don't know what your thoughts on Evan Ingram are specifically, though.
Yeah, I think he's a perfect fit in this offense, especially with how Bo Nix plays. Like, you think about Evan Ingram, he's never been a down the field win routes type of guy. Like, everything's been close to line of scrimmage. And Bo Nix is, people kind of use this as like a negative in his profile. It was like, well, he doesn't throw it down the field, everything's short, but he completes a ton of his passes. It's like, well, if that's who he's going to be in the NFL, and we saw that last year a bit, like Evan Ingram can eat. He can get a ton of volume short across line of scrimmage. So I don't mind that take at all. I think the tough part with Evan Ingram is like, we need to be careful with this because it's so hard to predict touchdowns in fantasy, but like, he just really has never been that type of guy. So I struggle to see like a huge ceiling, but like you said, I mean, he's going where he's going for a reason. And this is an offense that I think is going to be very good. I think this team is going to win a ton of games. Like they should push for 10 wins, roughly in that ballpark. Like, I think they're going to be a good team. So yeah, if you think Bo Nix can take a step forward in year 2 and you're not really buying all this kind of like wide receiver ambiguity behind Courtland Sutton, for fantasy, what we really need from these guys is you either got to be the first or second option in your offense, or you have to be on a team that scores a ton of touchdowns. And I think there's a real chance Evan Ingram could be the second target earner behind Courtland Sutton. Some people are kind of into like Vele as a sleeper, or Pat Bryant, some people like as a rookie, or whoever your wide receiver du jour is for Denver behind Sutton. They're going to rotate guys. I think Evan Ingram is going to be the constant there. So yeah, I don't mind that take, especially in PPR leagues, if you think that he can get all those short area targets.
Yeah, targets and opportunity. Obviously, that's king in PPR and in fantasy, honestly. I mean, touches. I'm a Steelers fan, right? So the whole you draft Najee Harris because he's going to get 15 carries a game automatically, not because he's going to bust off big runs. You
Right.
know, it was Deontay Johnson for a while too. It was like you draft him because he's going to get 120 targets. It's just, he's not going to go for 1,600 yards. So in PPR leagues, it does play a role there. Let's go ahead and take our break here. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about some follow your heart fantasy prospects that we just need to have on our teams. And we can't really explain why. Maybe we can, we'll see, but stay tuned for the second half of the Draft Dynasty podcast after this. And we're back here on the Draft Dynasty Podcast. It's Betts and Betts. Jeremy Betts here hosting, and Matthew Betts joining me from the Fantasy Footballers. Matthew, I really do appreciate you coming on and talking fantasy with me. It's been fun so far. Let's talk about a little bit more. I sent you on X when we were connecting, just kind of a little bit of an outline, and 4 to 5 players here that you just feel good about these guys, and you want them on your roster. And maybe there's some kind of statistical or analytical explanation as to why you do want them. Maybe there's not, but you just want them on your roster because you feel good about their opportunity this year in 2025. Where do you start with this category here as for a player?
Yeah, I think one of the guys that I'm targeting right now in best ball formats for sure until his price increases, and certainly in home leagues while his price lags behind, is Rashee Rice. And he kind of is like a divisive guy in the fantasy community because there's a lot of people that are like, I have no idea how good of an actual NFL wide receiver this guy is. Like, you think about like Devonta Adams on 3rd and 6, like got to have it on a slant route. I don't know if that's Rashee Rice where you can like do all those wide receiver things. But the bottom line is like whenever the dude has been on the field, he has scored a ton of fantasy points. His targets, his yards per out run are all in elite metrics as far as where he's been through 1.5 years in the league. And now we have a little bit of a buying window because of the perceived recovery off injury. But also there's a narrative that's kind of been floated out there around the Chiefs of too many mouths to feed, right? You've got Rashee Rice, you've got Hollywood Brown, you've got Xavier Worthy, Travis Kelce, and people are kind of not sure how the targets are going to go. And generally speaking, when we as fantasy drafters and players aren't sure of something, it feels uncomfortable, and then you get a little discount on it. So I'm calling my shot here. I think Rashee Rice is the guy just because he's been already. Travis Kelce, we already talked about on the show, is definitely declining and potentially in his last year. And when you look at Xavier Worthy, like he definitely had his moments last year, don't get me wrong, but he is not necessarily the type of guy that I think they envisioned when they drafted him to fill this short area role. They did those things last year with him because Rashee Rice was out of the lineup. Now you get Rashee Rice back doing his thing as kind of Mahomes' go-to guy. Worthy and Hollywood Brown able to kind of open it up for you and let him go to work in the middle of the field. I think that's what we're going to see again this year. And so right now in like home league type settings, Rice usually goes somewhere in like the 4th round. Generally speaking, I've seen him drop as far as like the 5th round. I mean, at those prices, I think those concerns of like target or order, recovery off the injury, all those things are already baked in. So if that ADP holds and you can get him somewhere in the back of the 4th, 5th round, Rashee Rice is definitely a target for me.
I love that one. The 3 was it 3 games he was on the field last year? It was like, oh yes. Man, this guy's gonna just absolutely cruise to top 5 wide receiver statistics because Pat Mahomes loves throwing the ball to him. He makes the most out of every target, it seems like. And I don't know, he kind of profiles for that Travis Kelce role a little bit in the offense as Kelce gets a little bit older, and maybe a little bit more because he can play outside. But I like that one a lot. I think I have to go with, and I mentioned the Carolina. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Mentioned the Carolina running game a little bit earlier. I think I've got to go with Chuba Hubbard. I think this guy's going to be good again. And if I'm taking a 0 running back strategy and I'm trying to find a guy in the 5th round or something like that, Chuba Hubbard, I really like as even my RB1. I really, really like him as my RB2 in leagues if I want to go out and get one of those tight ends early, spend a little bit more on the bigger name wide receivers in the first 3 or 4 rounds. But I just think that efficiency wise, it's going to be there. He had a top 15. He was top 15 in red zone touches last year. Jonathan Brooks is hurt again, so I don't know who's challenging him for snaps other than Trevor Etienne, who was just drafted this year. Miles Sanders isn't there. Miles Sanders isn't there anymore, right? I mean,
no, he's in Dallas. They've got Rico Dowdle.
Yeah, he's in
on
Dallas.
one year deal for Rico.
Oh, okay, Rico Dowdle. That's right.
They signed him in free agency to be the backup. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just kind of feel like he's going to be their guy again. 3 downs, comes off the field, probably some on 3rd downs for Rico Dowdle. But he's going to get a lot of work again this year. And I like him a lot in that range.
Yeah. Just signed a new contract extension too last year. We were all kind of confused by that, but at the time, and now obviously in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, and I think like you said, Canales, his teams have always featured a strong run game. And I think certainly Chuba is going to be at the front of that. And like you said, where he goes, it's a nice spot in the draft to grab an RB2. And if you do want to do a 0 RB team, he's definitely in range for me as a candidate to be the first running back of those builds. So I'm with you for sure.
Yeah. And how do you like this offense for best ball? Is it an offense that you're attacking at this point?
They're one of those teams that's nice because like best ball is a little different, obviously, than redraft leagues, but like you're always thinking about stacking and how can you build team stacks. And the only early guys are McMillan and Chuba Hubbard. And when I say early, I mean they're like usually 4th, 5th round, something like that. Then there's just players forever until the next guys come up, which is kind of Leggett, Adam Thielen, and Bryce Young. And so it's nice to be like, hey, if I grab one of those 2 early guys, McMillan or Chuba, and I'm kind of boxed out from my draft of other stacks that I was going for, the Panthers are just waiting for you right there. So they're kind of that nice backdoor stack. So I actually have taken a lot of them just for that reason. And we already mentioned kind of the potential. I'm careful saying upside case for Bryce Young, but the ascension in year 3 for Bryce Young, I think certainly is potentially there. And if he hits on his ADP, he's probably bringing a couple guys with him, and his teammates, generally speaking, are very cheap.
Who's another guy you're following your heart on this season?
Yeah, I feel like I've been burned a couple times because whenever you feel right about a guy, they miss time or whatever. And I'm hesitant to bring this guy up because he's currently dealing with a little bit of an ankle issue in the offseason, but it's Ken Walker. And, you mentioned Chuba as like pretty affordable price tag. Ken Walker's kind of like right there with him. If those are your 2 running backs to start, I would feel great about that. If you take a couple of elite wide receivers and an elite tight end, and then you get these 2 guys, like that feels great to me. It's very, very clear what this offense wants to be this year. This is a team that won 10 games last year and fired their OC because they were throwing the ball too much. You bring in Clint Kubiak, who had a really good scheme last year as far as the run game with the Saints. Remember the Saints for their Spencer Rattler starts and the train wreck that was down the season. But like early on, this offense was humming, tons of play action, tons of rushing, really good scheme for that to all work. And then you think about the head coach who was brought over as the DC 2 years ago from Baltimore. His philosophy is run the football and play great defense. And you saw early on the defense struggle. Down the stretch, this is one of the best defensive units in the league. And so if they're able to kind of carry that over into 2025 and establish the ground game with Ken Walker as the focal point of this offense, I think that's what they're going to do. Now, with Walker, I definitely think the talent is there. Number 1 in missed tackles forced per attempt last year. He was great. The problem is I do have this kind of doubt in the back of my mind that Sam Darnold turns into the old Sam Darnold. You leave Kevin O'Connell, you leave Justin Jefferson, Addison, the dome, the perfect scheme for him to play in. And you go out west, chilly, rainy weather with a declining Cooper Kupp. And I like JSN, but not necessarily who you would describe as like an alpha in the league as far as a wide receiver.
Right.
I just have lots of question marks about quarterback play in Seattle. So that's my hesitation on Ken Walker, but the talent is there, and I think the opportunity is absolutely going to be there.
Yeah, I like that one. He was almost one of the guys I was going to pick here too. It just feels right. It feels like the year that maybe it comes together for him a little bit, and the opportunity presents itself a little bit more heavily in his favor. Especially the fact that like Zach Charbonnet was drafted as kind of like hit I guess the 1-2 punch guy with Ken Walker, and he just hasn't really flashed that much for me. So Walker to me is just way more talented, and will get more opportunities in this offense. And I agree with you about Sam Darnold too. I'm steering clear of him in most anything. Even like projections for Seattle. I don't really love their supporting cast, and I do see some serious regression coming at quarterback for Sam Darnold. Potentially, we'll see. Maybe he turned a corner as a player, but I think the next guy I'm going to go with here is Brian Thomas Jr. I know he's going early, but I just want him on my fantasy team. He was lights out last year, and now you put him in this Liam Cohen system, and Trevor Lawrence. This is year 2 of his big contract. I just think that it's all kind of lining up for Brian Thomas Jr. to enter this upper echelon of receivers. And I mean, early second round, that could end up being good value for the type of production he put out there. That's wide receiver 8 right now, according to Fantasy Pros ADP, and 14th overall. So yeah, it's high, but I don't know. I just want him on my fantasy team this year. Even if he's my wide receiver 1, I feel really good about that.
Yeah, hard to say anything negative about Brian Thomas. He was a stud last year. 2.45 yards per run, catching the football for half the year from Mac Jones in a Doug Peterson system and scheme that, like, I'll always love Doug Peterson for the Philly Super Bowl, but
Sure.
like, I think the NFL kind of passed him by a little bit there. And now you get a young, innovative play caller in Liam Cohen, who I think is going to do great things with this offense. And I think Travis Hunter is awesome, but like, there's still a world that exists where he plays more corner than we realize. And then you're like,
Yeah.
okay, Brian Thomas Jr. is competing with Yami Brown, who is fine for what he does, Parker Washington, who's kind of a role player, and Brenton Strange, who's completely unproven. It's like Brian Thomas Jr. could just see 9 targets a game kind of easily, right? It's not, you don't have to squint to see it, and just be a stud this year. So I'm definitely with you on that one.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so you got somebody else you want to talk about here?
Yeah, I'm gonna cheat. I'll play to the host a little bit too on this one. I want Pittsburgh Steelers running backs, and
yeah,
I want both of them. I want both of these guys across. If I'm playing in a couple leagues, or if I'm in best ball, or whatever, like, I just want access to this backfield. Obviously, Caleb Johnson is the more exciting pick of the two. Yeah. I think Jalen Warren is insanely talented, but there's certainly a cap ceiling on what he can do. But the bottom line is, like, nobody is questioning what Arthur Smith offenses are going to do, right? They've been top 10 in total rush attempts in 5 of his 6 years as a play caller. They've been top 11 in 5 of those 6 years. So you're very likely getting that classic Steelers football of running, brand of football, run the ball, play good defense. They don't really have a wide receiver 2 behind DK Metcalf. Like, it's super clear what the philosophy is here. And when you look at, like you said, those Najee Harris years, for a while it was insanely inefficient. But we're drafting Caleb Johnson right now. Like, I'm currently seeing like 8th, 9th round on some formats. You're drafting him 4, 5, 6 rounds behind where you would have had to draft the Najee Harris of old. And there is a world that exists where they give Caleb 270 touches this year, or bull case 300 touches this year if things go right. And I think he's a smash at that ADP. So I love Caleb Johnson. I think Warren is totally fine too, because a lot of fantasy is won through contingency situations that play out, right? Like, if Caleb Johnson happens to go down, I think Jalen Warren is a potential league winner where he goes and drafts. The same can be said for Caleb Johnson. Like, I think they do want to give Warren his touches, but if Warren does go down, Caleb Johnson is stepping into a role where I think pretty easily in projections, like, we'd be projecting, 18, 19, 20 touches a game pretty comfortably for this guy. So yeah, I think he's a perfect fit. He's a Steeler through and through, the way he fits this team and his scheme. Obviously, he played at Iowa wearing black and gold too, so it kind of makes sense.
Right.
But I want Steelers running backs this year because the cost is down. I think they're going to touch the ball a ton.
Outside of, and I try to take the black and gold lenses off when I'm evaluating like draft picks and things like that. But outside of even just wanting Caleb Johnson in Pittsburgh because I'm a fan of his game and I think he's a good fit, I think he might have been one of the best fits in the draft for any player going to any team based on the
Yeah.
style of play, the scheme that he's going into. The wide zone fits really well with his game. So I expect that. You mentioned last year they were 11th in yards. They were 24th in EPA per rush. It wasn't great efficiency wise, and I think that number goes way up this year with Jaylen Warren and Caleb Johnson. Caleb Johnson's not going to like he's not going to run away from people necessarily, but he's a lot more explosive than Najee Harris has been the last few years. And so I agree with you. I went with a different Pittsburgh Steeler. I didn't want to go too heavy on the Steelers, so I'm glad you brought them up. But I went with Pat Freiermuth as my next guy. And you mentioned when we were talking tight ends, if you're trying to get one of these lower down the rung tight ends, you want to see, are they going to be where are they going to be in the pass catching chain? And Pat Freiermuth is pretty clearly right now the second option in the passing game behind DK Metcalf. When you're talking about the wide receiver 2 being Calvin Austin the third or Roman Wilson, if he can do anything, right? Last year he was out because of injury. So Freiermuth is the number 2 target there right now. And he's been hampered, I think, statistically by the fact that the Steelers haven't had a quarterback that wants to throw over the middle of the field in like 5 years. Between Kenny Pickett and Matt Canada, where the middle of the field was basically non-existent, and then Russell Wilson and Justin Fields last year, Arthur Smith wants to throw the ball over the middle of the field, but Russell Wilson can't see there, and Justin Fields just turns those down constantly. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be at least better at that than what we've seen the last few years, fits that a little bit better. And Pat Freiermuth, when you talk about getting the number 2 targets in the offense and then finally having maybe a quarterback in a system that can get him the ball over the middle of the field, even if it's quickly, I think he's going to improve on what I think he finished 7th in yards or in fantasy points for tight ends last year. He has a chance to improve upon that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and these Arthur Smith systems have always featured heavy tight end usage. The only concern I have is just this Jonnu Smith stuff that's kind of been floated out there.
Yeah.
I don't know how true it is or isn't, but obviously it's been brought up a couple times. And it's like, man, if they're poking around for Jonnu Smith, like, what does that mean, right? Kind of thing. But like, if we get to mid-August, when most people do their drafts, or late August, and Jonnu Smith is not on this roster, then I think this is a great take. I'm just worried about what the Jonnu Smith trade means. But otherwise, they're going to use the tight end. And it's funny you brought that up with like the Steeler quarterback player for the last few years being allergic to the middle of the field. It's so true. Like you put like the heat maps up. You see this on Twitter and stuff all the time of like Russ, and it's just sideline moonballs, or Justin Fields just can't process the middle of the field. Like that's his downfall as a player, as a quarterback in the NFL. It's a ton of that. And so if Freiermuth, nobody's expecting him to come out and give you 1,100 yards or something and be Brock Bowers, but like I think there's a chance that he could kind of give you one of those like 600-yard, and like all of a sudden you look up at the end of the year, you're like, oh, 8 touchdowns. Like that's a nice tight end 7 season, something like that. I think it's definitely possible. So obviously a Penn State guy too, so I have to give a little hat tip there to Freiermuth. So I like that one.
Good deal. Let's do one more, and then we'll head out of here. Anybody else that you want to talk about here?
Yeah, I'll cheat again. I feel like I'm cheating because I'm giving player pairs, but
that's
one
fine.
of AJ Brown or Devonta Smith on my teams. And this is not a Saquon is a bad pick take. It's just that what he did last year is almost impossible to repeat, right? One of the best seasons we've ever seen in the NFL. And you think about the Eagles and how they played last year, they had an insanely easy schedule where they were just up 2 touchdowns in almost every game in the third and fourth quarter. And so as a result, you saw the pass volume from Jalen Hurts just crater in the second half of games. In the first half of games, he was 14th in the league in dropbacks per game, right around league average. In the second half of games, he was dead last because the plan was we're up. Let's just give the ball to Saquon. Let's get out of here and let's move on to next week. And so you get AJ Brown, who I think is still one of the best receivers in the game, and you just give him a little more volume. Good things are going to happen, right? Same thing with Devonta Smith. So if you miss out on AJ Brown, then Devonta Smith becomes a target. But I think AJ Brown, we look back at the season, I think you're going to see a lot more pass attempts from Jalen Hurts. I think you're going to see a lot more upside from those types of guys. And the other thing with that is that the Eagles go from the one of the easiest strength of schedules in the NFL last year. Now they have one of the most difficult strength of schedules in the NFL this year. Maybe a little Super Bowl hangover. I just think you're going to see a lot more back and forth with this team as far as their game scripts, where it's not going to be so easy to feed the ball to Saquon 24 times a game and let Jalen Hurts go into cruise control. So if he's forced to throw more this year, obviously AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, I think are going to be the direct beneficiaries there.
Yeah, I like that. I want pieces of the Eagles offense. And I think you guys were talking about it in one of the shows I was listening to on the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty show. I think that isn't Devonta Smith, like, doesn't he own like 28 or 29% of the target share there in Philadelphia, even though he's not the number one receiver? It was a crazy high number.
Yeah, let me pull up his profile. Yeah, we have him right now. He had a 28.6% target share.
Yeah,
which
that's crazy.
The raw targets were not incredible last year because he missed some time with injury, and obviously it was a low volume offense for passing. He only had 89 total targets. But the nice thing about these situations, much like the Bengals with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, it's like, yeah, Mike Gesicki pops up here and there, but like Dallas Goedert is not going to command the offense.
Right.
Like the offense is going to flow through Saquon on the ground and pretty much only those two guys on a consistent basis through the air, Devonta Smith and AJ Brown. So both guys should sleepwalk into a 25+% target share. And I think both guys could push for 30 again this year for sure.
I like it. The last player I'll mention here, it's just really right now based on where you can get him. So if you're drafting early and you're willing to risk it, go get James Cook. I don't know why his ADP is going to shoot up if they figure out the contract situation or something like that. But I mean, he showed up to minicamp. He's probably going to show up to training camp. He says, I like my money. He's going to play even if he doesn't get a contract. So I don't think there's as much risk as maybe it feels like, but he was RB7 last year in PPR leagues, and he just fits what that offense wants to do so well. He's going as RB14 right now. I just feel like that's incredible value, and give me James Cook as the RB14 if I'm able to get him in the late third round or early fourth round. I like that a lot.
Yeah, Cook's interesting because there's a lot of warning signs on him that he will not do what he did last year as far as his insane touchdown production.
Yeah, that's true.
But right now, if that ADP holds, it's basically already baked in. If he was going as the running back 7 because of what he did last year or whatever, then I'd be like, you know what, I think I'm probably going to fade this and be out. But there is some concern about the contract, and that's kind of been the headline right now. And as a result, you're getting a little discount. So for me, he's probably an ADP specific type of target. Like if he shoots back up because of the contract sign, or he's in camp the first day, or you know, whatever plays out, I'll probably be a little underweight or sit this one out just because of the concerns on touchdown regression. But this is an offense that's going to score a ton of points. And I think if last time I looked, they have the 5th easiest strength of schedule in the NFL. And, you know, we keep doing this every year with Josh Allen's guys after Diggs. It's like, is it Coleman? Is it Josh Palmer? Is it Dalton Kincaid? It's like, it's probably just James Cook. It's probably James Cook.
James Cook, Khalil Shakir, and Josh Allen. I mean, Josh Allen is the offense. So, all right. Hey, good stuff. Matthew, I appreciate it, man. Appreciate you coming on. It was fun. And go ahead and plug your stuff. So our listeners know where to find you and how to listen to your fantasy football takes.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. This was great. Always good to connect with another bets. You guys can find me on Twitter at the Fantasy PT. And then, like Jeremy mentioned, I'm on the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. That's out every Wednesday. And then I'm also on the DFS and betting podcast that comes out every Friday. Right now, it's a lot of like off-season betting talk, tons of best ball content, and then in season, obviously, weekly DFS.
Good stuff. I love me some DFS. I'm going to be all over that again as the season gets closer. So appreciate you coming on. Thank you all for tuning in to this edition of the Draft Dynasty Podcast. Be sure to check out Fans First Sports Network for all of your off-season NFL news and notes. We'll be back next time here on the DDP. Until then, keep drafting, everybody.